So in this office mix, we're going to look at the engineering seal. We're going to look at different ethical frameworks within which a profession's ethics can be defined. And we're going to look a little bit about mobility of engineers. So the engineering seal is actually the means to show that a document has been reviewed by a professional engineer, unlike our friend here in this image. A seal is basically used to indicate who is responsible for the work that has been sealed. But if you don't seal the work, that doesn't mean you're not still liable for the work that you did. It's required on final versions of documents, but not on drafts. Because more than one person might be responsible for a document, you might require multiple seals for a multidisciplinary document. Documents that have been sealed can't be changed without review, in particular by the people who sealed it in the first place, for example. So now we're going to move on and think about ethics. So fundamentally, ethics is the philosophy of right and wrong. And we talk about ethics and morals, where morals might be a personal reflection, and ethics might be more of a social group's reflection on what is right and wrong. There have been many learned people who've considered what ethics should address, and fundamentally it's the difference between responsibilities and freedoms. However, many times those can conflict, and so we have to perhaps consider many ways of approaching the problem, and ethical theories can help with this. The first of the ethical theories often used in engineering is from John Stuart Mill, saying that if an action produces the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people, it's the ethically correct solution. However, the duration, intensity, and equality of the distribution should be considered. Immanuel Kant provides a different view in that his approach suggests that every person has to follow certain actions that would be defined as universal principles, being honest, fair, and not hurting others. However, there can be cases when these can create conflicts. John Locke's approach is to consider the individual. All individuals are free and equal, and everyone has a right to certain things. The challenge with Locke's rights is that sometimes it's difficult to determine how to respond if one person's rights infringe on another person. Aristotle's approach is basically to consider what's called a golden mean, where we consider the action that is neither excessive or deficient in some way, and that happiness is achieved by following this golden mean. And so we can summarize these ethical theories in three categories. The consequence-based ethics, which Mill is an example, where actions can be assessed by how they further well-stated goals, what the consequences of the action might be. Whereas Kant and Locke are really intention-based ethics, where we consider what was the best intent, what was the rightness of the action, rather than the consequences of it. And finally, Aristotle basically considers virtue ethics, where the right action comes from the person who is virtuous. So ethical actions depend on the attributes of people rather than the consequences or the intentions. So we're jumping around a little, but we're going to finish by talking about a thing called the duty to report. So professional engineers have obligations both to the greater public and also to the people they work for. And sometimes these can be in conflict. So obviously, if we're employed by someone, we do have responsibilities to our employer, and particularly when it comes to confidential information. We should avoid disclosing confidential information. If, however, the public is at risk and we discover this through some confidential information, we do have a duty to act. How we act, however, is part of the formal duty to report. So PEO is very clear that our primary responsibility is to the public. There is, however, no easy way to ensure that we take that responsibility correctly in the most ethically sensible way. So in summary, if we believe there's a danger to public welfare coming from our organization, we are required to report it, even if we're not directly involved. That involves us firstly trying to address the issue internally. If that fails, then we can contact PEO, but we do not go to the public. PEO will take up the issue for us and ensure that it is dealt with. So I bring up mobility here just as a final thought, because we will address it right at the end of the course. I want to mention a couple of things. Within Canada, there is mobility of engineers. Once you are licensed in one province, it's relatively easy to be licensed in another province. Internationally, it's not that simple. There are some accords, but they typically deal with educational backgrounds rather than the licensing requirements. There are other international agreements, in particular the International Professional Engineer designation for working on international projects. But we'll come back to this topic right at the end of the course.